So I'm Jean-Claude Freymond Guth, and I live here in Basel and in Brussels, Belgium. Actually, I'm a trained artist, so I studied art in Zurich in the early 2000s, and I always had a space at the same time where I would invite friends, but also other people that I just liked to exhibit, and it was a very social place. And growing out of that, I then sort of was part of different initiatives, curatorial initiatives, and then opened my gallery under my own name and a program and a set space in 2008. And I closed it last summer, so August 2017, here in Basel. Financial reasons. It was just in the last years, it became really uncontrollable when to make sales. And we used to have, a sort of a good middle range of artists that we sell regularly and to regular clients. And then, always young or people that you don't represent yet, but, have easily placeable work. And then we had those artists that we mainly sold to institutions and large, complex bodies of works, historical works. And this is basically the third group is what kept the gallery alive, and what helped us to expand and really invest into restoration or long planning. But when these big sales just suddenly don't happen and reservations of a year or longer are just cancelled, it becomes a huge problem, and it's sort of like a bulk risk that became too big. And with the energy and let's say the attention that I was giving for these things to make, of course the rest of the program would suffer, or let's say you would not maybe make the sales because you just have no time to do it, and it became very unbalanced, that two sales can save your gallery for 2 years or they're not. And that was the main financial reason. And then there were other reasons where at one point also I thought maybe there isn't really a place for me in the art market or for my sort of person and my program. Not that it wouldn't be good enough, but we had artists last year in Documenta, in Biennale. We had a lot of support from collectors, curators, museums, but we didn't sell anything in the fair last year, one piece. And then you have to ask yourself, what is it, is it just my idea that this will work? And how long can I stretch this idea? And who is going to carry the weight? Because in my case, there was there wasn't much family money or something that I could have just constantly pushed in. The money that I had was gone, and now it was on the artists' shoulders that they had to wait far too long for payments and never knew if it would work out. And it just became very, very stressful for everybody. And I thought it's rather close now when it was out of control already, I would say, but let's do it now and then move on and try to learn or take this experience and apply it to other things. Closing, I decided at the end of a long process where I did a lot of I looked at a lot of different options and I tried a lot of different things, and to be honest, before I closed the gallery, after the fair did really, we didn't do well at the fair at all, and I knew I was like, okay, now that was the last thing for me. It's like, okay, we do the fair, we have all these great reservations, we have these artists in the banner, we're in touch with so many people already, several months in advance, things are on hold. I was quite sure we would make it, and it would give us enough time to just breathe and maybe relax and reconfigure, maybe finding partners or something. And then it didn't happen, and then I was talking to several Basel collectors, also my landlords, and there was a huge willingness to give me money, and a lot of money, and to give me money either in cash or then in helping to produce work for the next shows, or giving me free rent basically for a period of time. So the awareness of the people in my immediate environment was there, and the conversations, and I was extremely touched because basically overnight somebody approached me. I have a plan. I talk to these and these people. This is the money that I can put in. Talk to that person. I'm sure they can put in that money. You know, and I was extremely touched. Unfortunately, it came too late. To me, on a personal level, I was so exhausted because I had been fighting for such a long time and worrying. And also I thought, well, you know, what is the real change, you know? How long is it sustainable, and will not just more people lose money and more people be disappointed? And like, you know, I really thought about it, and I thought, no, maybe it's better to close, because, you know, if we knew that in 2 years things would pick up again, it would have been totally worth it. But if not, then no. And also these people are patrons and supporters of you know, Kunsthalle Basel, for example, or other important institutions in Switzerland, and I don't want to take away their budget to have my gallery, you know, and this would have been an immediate result of it. And I was like, no, if it was there. So yeah, and a lot of collectors did write to me afterwards and actually said, had I known how serious it was, I'm sorry that somebody who cancelled a big sale in Basel wrote to me a very long emotional email saying that she was very, very sorry and she feels partly responsible. And you know, this is, I was really touched by the humanity, or like by the reaching out, and even before that. So I don't feel betrayed or left alone at all in anything. I feel like it was fair, and even my artists, to whom I owe money to, and I've always been public about it, that I do, they are understanding, they are not pleased, and I'm working out with each artist the way how maybe we can level it, or and it's not, you know, not every conversation is happy and not every relationship is good, but we're working on it. And yeah, I think it's, I'm really surprised by the understanding I got. I really believe in this, that, you know, the art world is not independent cosmos, so whatever is happening in society also is reflected in the art world. Meaning that, for example, political events like Trump's election or Brexit, they resulted one-to-one in cancellations of sales because people are afraid. It totally stirs up certain comfort zones maybe that people thought were for granted, and so people don't take risks anymore. That's one thing. So I don't know how you can change. I think it would have to be part of a larger social, political climate where, you know, to create an atmosphere that is not based on fear and on sort of like black and white situations. That's one thing. The other thing is probably also the expectations of everybody. I think a lot of people thought there was so much money to make, and it was a fast thing. So I think to slow down things, to be more selective. As mid-sized galleries is very important because you somehow identify yourself with the big names who had a very different way how they started and very different conditions how they could, you know, secure the position that they have now, which is, you know, fragile in their level as well. Not many galleries are completely on, you know, on stable feet. So I think to orient yourself more towards what is really the reality today. How does the market work? What is needed? How do we, you know, negotiate also with collections or artists, and how do we produce? How do we represent ourselves? To define what, something that is more contemporary and not a 90s model, which is just not the situation. And you know, every context of galleries has different problems. New York has the real estate problem, which Berlin doesn't have. You know, London has other problems with now Brexit and the insecurities. So every context has its own combination of why it's difficult. But generally, I think it has to do that people think that we are still in the heydays, and we are not. So yes. I think, really advantages in the art world is that there's a huge diversity. So there are those people who are just going to go blue chip or pure investment, and that's great. And then there's some people who are just doing young, super inexpensive, but they also don't help their artists or can't help or don't want to really invest in production or, like, let's say, more thorough representation. So there are different ways of doing it. I think a big topic that has come up, and that's again also reflected on a more social, broader context, is this idea of transparency, of political advocacy. I'm sorry. Like, what are the rules that we are like living and working by, to define them? For example, this whole issue of contracts, that there's hardly any written legal documents that define collaboration and expectation and responsibilities among all the different participants. I think that's something that is happening because people see that it doesn't work just for everybody. There's not just something left over for everybody to, pay the bills in the end. People, there are several initiatives of galleries that work together and make fair initiatives, or even mixtures like Condo, which isn't really a fair, it's more a collaborative project. And this model has been copied by other cities and other people. I think people are organizing themselves and really questioning the standards and the ways they collaborate. One thing I find fantastic with the Condo is that, as far as I know, if I were to host your gallery, and you're there for the opening or something, and then you go back to Sao Paulo and I make a sale, there's no commission. Or I even just send you the contact and say, write to this person, he's interested. So there's all this idea of competition, I think, is also changing. The collaboration is probably the most important aspect for me, because I don't art for me is a way of communication in the broadest sense, or in sharing ideas or getting ideas from one person to the next. And so the collaboration is the manifestation of these sort of loose concepts to something that is more graspable, I would say. For example, when I was speaking of the gallery, I would always say we. And people always ask me, oh, how many owners are you? I'm like, oh, I'm the only one. But it's just that I considered the gallery to be a multitude of people, rather than just me with some artists to sell or show. It was a process that, of course, is also more conflictuous, because I tried to involve people a lot more. But I think it was important for me because I'm not interested necessarily in just selling a product, but in representing an idea or even a whole life concept. And that it can only happen through very intense collaboration. Collectors need to realize the responsibility that they don't ask for incredible discounts or payment procedures. There's a lot of energy of galleries going into just securing things, and it sometimes feels very ironic for gallerists who are struggling like hell that very, very wealthy people don't answer or don't tell you their little problems they have with redesigning their whatever yacht, and you're like, seriously? And you can't pay the $5,000 that you owe me since 3 months, and I have to write to you all the time? There is something, collectors should be more professional again, and it should not be about their vanity and their social status, I think. Curators and museums also have a very important role, and I think they are realizing it. But also artists need to. A lot of artists, of course, get intimidated by the success that maybe some of their friends have, and they expect their gallery to deliver the same services, and it's just not possible. Not everybody can be a superstar immediately, and I've had it in my own program where you get certain acknowledgement, and that really fires you up, and you think, now I can do it. But your expectation and the risk that you also ask everybody to take by producing and overproducing is too big, and suddenly maybe it doesn't last, or maybe there's like the series of works isn't so good, and suddenly the gallery is blocked with 80,000 of production for pieces that nobody wants, and the artist is already working on a different series. So I think everybody needs to be more professional about it, more realistic understanding also the balance sheets. People should know what they're spending money on, and maybe analyzing it. I mean, it's just not done by hanging out in cool parties and having fancy clothes, and I mean, which is the social aspect, of course, is very important, but it's super important to do your homework. I realized that I could have avoided many mistakes had I been more precise in knowing my budget and the limits, and not being too much up in the air. At the same time, of course, that energy also got us very far. It was very important, this motivation, but at a certain level, I think, of operation, you have a responsibility, and so then it's not just about yourself, and you have employees. I think we had more than 20 people depending basically on the sales I made. Artists, their families, my employees, myself, our technicians. So it's not just about it's not just about being creative, and that's people have to realize that, especially in the mid-size section, I think. No, I think like everything, there has just been too much. Everybody was believing it would grow and grow and grow, and because it constantly grows, there will be bits and pieces for everybody. There's a bit of the cake for everybody, and I think that's an illusion. That we realize that now, that yes, it is growing, but if you look at what is growing, it's a certain specific, very high end of the market that, of course, is able to reach incredible auction prices, but that's a very, very different thing. And for the rest, it's not growing, it's stagnated, or it has actually totally collapsed in many cases. So art fairs in that context also have to reflect that I think it's extremely important to have art fairs, because they are professional meeting points, and if they are not fun fairs or like entertainment for wealthy people, if they're actually a professional networking opportunity and a way for galleries who are not in the major cities. For me personally, it was extremely important for the first 5 years, I did, I think, 7 fairs a year, and we were 2 or 3 people in a gallery. We spent a huge budget, and my accountant was always like, your art fair expenses are way too high, you can't afford it. But it was important because nobody would come to Zurich from the people, or once, twice a year maybe, but that's how I met the collectors and the curators internationally. So I think if it is really a professional thing and good for each segment of the market, then it's important. But entertainment and all of that, the rest around, I think, is something maybe that people are not needed, and I don't think galleries should invest into that too much. I personally think it's extremely important to have a space. I'm not sure if it needs to be a set space. I think there are interesting models for galleries to maybe travel for 2 years, or I personally support the idea that galleries really are in peripheral locations, because what sense does it make that everybody moves to New York if maybe in your context in Kentucky you had a fantastic art school and really something to say, and maybe there were even local collectors there, and you can make an amazing gallery there, and maybe and art fairs should be aware of that there are galleries everywhere, or like I was just in the Balkans, there are amazing things happening. To decentralize things, I think, is important, and then I think you will also have your clientele again. If you're competing with 50 other galleries in East London, or I don't know how many, probably 500, of course people get saturated and tired, they don't want to go anymore, and you constantly, like, if you as a collector get every day 50 PDFs by random galleries, you're not going to look at anything anymore, and that's what happens. A lot of dealers complain that the real collectors don't even come to the art fairs anymore. And so if you're not in New York or London, when will you meet them if they don't come to the gallery, they don't go to the art fair? So yeah, I think the space is super important. I think it's very, very dangerous because I understand this, let's say, illusion maybe, or this fantasy that there is another market where you can still grow, where you don't have all the same problems as here, where, you know, we know the problems. I understand that. I think it's great, and again, I think fantasy and idealism is a big motivation for gallerists. It needs to be, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense. Because economically it certainly doesn't make sense. But what people underestimate is not just the buying, let's say, methods of Chinese collectors or Asian collectors, which, as you said, is often based on blue chip and immediacy and stuff. It's the language, and it's the personal relationships. You need to be present. You can't just go to Art Basel Hong Kong and think you're going to sell out your booth. You have to do it many times. You have to go there throughout the year. You need to visit the people. They often don't speak your language or the languages that you speak, so you need to have a good interpreter. You need to spend time with them, and then a lot of things are possible. And that's, I think, an investment as let's say a Western mid-sized gallery you probably can't make, you know. So it's just a huge risk. I don't know. Maybe you know. I in the end started to make project budgets with my artists when we said, okay, this art fair will be extremely important. This could be really important to do, or this production. Let's do a budget, how we can finance it. And if we sell it, we first pay back all this like costs that we calculated to do this thing, and the rest we split. So to involve artists more if you can, but that's always, you know, maybe then you can say, okay, I have a budget with you, I think your work will do great in China or in, I don't know, Seoul, and let's try it. This is the costs and this is what we do, and if we can afford it, but you know, it's a big risk, I don't know. Well, I've realized in the last months that I really love strategic thinking, and I've been helping friends with just, you know, making a clear mind, or being sort of a sparring partner for questions of strategy or sometimes financing or decision making. For example, which fair do you do and which fair you shouldn't do, or galleries who maybe, you know, want to change their program. But also artists themselves, artists estates, or now in this jury thing in Bosnia. I mean, I was teaching for 4 years as a mentor in the master's program in Zurich. I really love that because it's exactly that, spontaneous, temporary exchange and thinking of solutions, not the overall solution, but the specific solution. I would love to do that in a more or less independent way. If there is a structure that I can do it within, it would be fantastic. Less worries for me, less modeling, or then independent, but I don't know. I don't want to be an advisor, I think, unless I'm in a miracle collection. But I don't like, I was so much involved with money, and so many of my decisions were dealing with money. I would be happy to not have not have this, it's a strong word, but capitalist aspect to my work. But other than that, I'm open. I don't think I will be an artist.